Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. As always, I'm your host, the Game Master, and today is part three in our series about the Crime Syndicate of America and their evolution into the next big threat in our game world. I'll post links to parts one and two. You might want to watch those videos first, or this one might not make much sense. But before we get into that, make sure you smash that like button, check to see if you're still subscribed, ring the bell for notifications, and as always, leave us a comment. We've got a great community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. This one begins in 1964 in the negative universe, which we refer to as the Negaverse for short. Here, for the most part, the good guys are bad guys, and the bad guys are the good guys. And the heroic counterparts of the Legion of Doom in the Negaverse created an army of heroic Bizarro Ultramen who are helping them hunt down the villains in that dimension. And to make a long story short, several villains from the Negaverse are now fleeing to Earth K, which is our primary setting of our game world. And one of them is the character they call Superwoman, who is that negative universe's version of Wonder Woman. So she went to the Hellfire Club last game where the Red King was asleep in his bed. And she put her lasso around his ankle. And her whole deal is that she wants to be on top. No pun intended. And she tends to hitch her wagon to whoever the most powerful man in a universe is. And on Earth K, the Red King is the guy who currently has the Infinity Gems, right? So she wants that power. Another thing worth mentioning for new listeners is that the Red King has an advantage from a game called Tales from the Floating Vagabond. And the advantage is on his character sheet, and it's called the Valentino effect. And I've mentioned it a bunch of times on this channel, but I don't think I've ever actually read it out of the book, right? So the way it reads is as follows. The major effect of this advantage is that members of the opposite sex throw themselves at the feet of this character. They are willing to do almost anything for him except leave him alone. They will go out of their way to keep the character out of danger, even to the point of knocking the character over the head during a firefight and dragging them to quote unquote safety. The minor effect of this is that the victims of this will become very jealous of each other and fight to the death unless checked. Fortunately, the effect of this advantage wears off after a day, which is weird because we could have sworn it was 2 days. So house rule in our game world is that it lasts a little longer than that. But at any rate, getting back to the point, yes, she has her lasso around his ankle while he's asleep, but this advantage still works because this is the first day she's ever met this character. So he wakes up and she's feeling amorous. And by the way, if you're familiar with her, she appears in this animated movie. It was one of those DC like direct to DVD things a few years back. I want to say it was called Crisis on Two Earths. And if you watch her in that movie, she is just always in the mood for romance, right? She's to the extreme, in my opinion. So this is very on brand for her, right? And he's more or less in the same boat, right? At any rate, so she hits on him. He kind of like half-heartedly tells her no. And she asks if he really wants her to leave him alone. And we more or less played it for laughs, but because the lasso was around his ankle, we had him say no, he doesn't want left alone, you know. And also, I should point a few things out. The first is that just because the Red King doesn't have some sort of a physical weakness like kryptonite or something like that, we have illustrated quite often on this channel that he does have a crippling weakness, but it's psychological, right? And it's beautiful women. Time and time again, the Red King has made stupid decisions, and it usually involves a pretty face. And just like Wonder Woman, this alternate version of Diana also has the quote unquote beauty of Aphrodite. So there's that, right? But let's go a little deeper than that. If you followed the channel, you may have seen some of our videos that took place in the BC era when the heroic Diana on Earth K and a much younger Red King were lovers. And they were an item for years and years and years and years until they weren't. The heroic Diana chose to leave him, and he was heartbroken. And some of the other guys who have been game masters over the years in our game world have hinted that the reason the Red King is always chasing various female characters is because he has this metaphorical hole in his heart, and he can't find a woman who has all of Diana's qualities. And he might find one that has like this or that, but the other GM's suggestion was that losing Diana is where everything went wrong for him, right? And that he just never got over her, which I have never said for sure that that is the case, but I do think it's a very interesting theory. And I think it's good to bring up now because after all these years, the woman who is throwing herself at him is another Diana, right? So aside from the fact that he would go for it anyways, like anybody with her level of appearance, like in GURPS, I'm just going to mention this real quick because I like how they break down appearance. Uh, they have average appearance, which I think is self-explanatory. The next level up is attractive, which means you're okay looking, you know. And then the next level up is beautiful. And then the level above that is very beautiful. And very beautiful is basically as good looking as a human being could possibly be. But then in fourth edition GURPS, they brought in a new level, and I think it's called transcendent appearance. And so that would be like a goddess. And so they're saying if you take a supermodel or Hollywood actress or whatever, the best she can possibly do is very beautiful, right? But then if you bring in somebody like Aphrodite, they're beyond that level, right? And so my point is that that would be the appearance that this evil Diana has because they say she has the beauty of Aphrodite. So, I mean, just that by itself, he's gonna fall for it, right? He's gonna take the bait. But then on top of that, realize she looks like the great love of his life that got away. And she sounds like her and smells like her and just everything, right? So, all that said, she starts to do her thing and she is like, she asks him about how he killed Ultraman. And specifically, she asks him if he enjoyed it. And since the lasso is around his ankle, we had him say yes, that he did enjoy killing Ultraman. That he thought Ultraman had it coming. Ultraman had been beating the negative universe's version of Supergirl. You know, he's just an abusive prick through and through, right? But So that's like kind of why he did it. But then now we're finding out that on another level, he does just kind of like an excuse to be violent, right? So the evil Diana smiles and she kind of like purrs in a way when she talks, and she tells him that's dark, but she's saying it in a good way, like she's into it. And to be clear, I think we've mentioned in the past that he does want to do bad things, right? But before he always fought that urge, he'd always like hit the brakes, so to speak. And so what the evil Diana is doing is basically trying to get him to take his foot off the brake. She's trying to bring out the bad in him because she thinks that together they can conquer the multiverse. So something we did in game that I forgot to mention before this is the Red King had some run-ins with various characters that had super speed, and it occurred to him that they could take the rings off of his fingers using that speed. So he used his powers to have the metal on like the inside of each ring, the part of the metal that touches his skin, grow these like roots that burrowed into the bone. And so, long story short, the rings are a part of him now and can't be physically removed. So, one morning, he and Diana wake up and she's looking at the rings and tries to take one off to examine it. And she notices it won't come off. So, she comments on this and he basically just says, yeah, they don't come off, which in a way she would be used to because she was on the same team with a villain named Power Ring. And DC Heroes has this interesting rule where a character like, say, the Green Lantern has his famous ring listed under the equipment section on his character sheet. And if an item is typed out in all caps, then it means that it can't be taken off of him. So in the case of the Green Lantern in the game, one of the ring's many powers is it can't be taken off against the will of the wearer. So the evil Diana thinks that's what this is. Um, and thanks to well, okay. So she tries to give the Red King some orders. And one of my players named John reminded me, actually, that the mind gem keeps this from working. That Diana would literally have to roll infinity on 2d10 to accomplish this in that way, which of course can't be done. So Diana instead goes with good old fashioned manipulation, right? And basically, she starts treating the seven deadly sins like a checklist. So, for instance, on the subject of, say, gluttony, we have this alien race in our game world who we refer to as the lobstermen. Josh and John Boggs used the term hominid to describe them, which I believe comes from Magic the Gathering. I could never remember the right words. So when I would run games in the 90s, I kept calling them Pomeranians. But, anyways, so they are these reoccurring villains in our game world. During the 1950s, during the science fiction B movie era, when they'd make movies about alien invasions all the time and things like giant ants, we decided to do stories where these lobster men would attack. And some were just a little bigger than a human and would walk upright, etc. But sometimes those guys would bring with them these kaiju sized lobsters, right? And we also saw just about every size in between those extremes. So, point being, the evil Diana manages to convince the Red King that after the yet another attack of the Lobstermen, right? They go to the Pomeranian homeworld and kill a ton of these guys as revenge for messing with Earth. So that's like wrath. We were talking about the seven deadly sins earlier, right? So that's wrath. And on top of all that, then the Red King eats their queen with butter. So yeah, so then that's gluttony. But at any rate, so if we skip forward to lust, which, like I say, is the Red King's biggest weakness, right? And it's this Diana's deal too. So she's like trying to exploit it. And by the way, my wife was playing Diana, and we ran some adventures that were a villain campaign for a while. And anyways, my wife coined the term harem wrangler. And we'd also make a lot of jokes about gotta catch them all, kind of a Pokemon joke. But at any rate, so what would happen is like the evil Diana would do stuff like go find Ultra Girl, who is Supergirl's counterpart from the negative universe, and they would fight. And when Superwoman won, she would use her lasso on Ultra Girl and commanded her to basically get over whatever objections she had. And then she brings, Ultra Girl back as a gift for the Red King. And by the way, this is after the time period is up on that Valentino effect I mentioned. So they don't try to fight to the death or anything like that. But you get the basic gist, right? The evil Diana is doing this sort of thing to try to earn favor in the Red King's eyes and sort of like become his queen. And also, by the way, I mentioned in a recent video that the Red King has been using the Infinity Gems on all of these women. And so he is more or less hacking several areas of the brain, including the substantia nigra, the ventral tegmental area. And so these copious amounts of dopamine are being produced. So this is a really messed up situation because that means the girls are actually happy. Like, even if they find themselves in a situation they would normally not be into, because of what's happening with their brains, they're happy, right? And the thing is, like, I spoke to a friend of mine who's a research scientist who studies the human brain, and he was saying how basically none of the characters involved in this would actually understand what's really going on. So while the Red King is at this point in our timeline, he is absolutely the most villainous he has ever been, right? For this, like if you break everything down into all of its smallest pieces, for this one piece of it, he really does think he's just making people happy, right? But it's actually super addictive. And so he's subjugating them without realizing it. And to be clear, he's doing this to all of them, 100%. That includes the evil Diana. So, I mean, it is just a mess. And they all keep getting deeper and deeper into this like twisted situation. And while, yes, Diana is like technically addicted to him now, that's not to say that that would make her stop doing her Grimer worm tongue thing, goading him onto worse and worse behavior. She basically tells him to look around him at all the turbulent stuff that was going on in the 1960s. And she tells him that his world is going to end and that the two of them should rule it because, she just kind of wants to rule. I don't even think she cares how it's really done at the end of the day, right? And so he more or less, he finally agrees to it, right? So think of like when you ride a roller coaster and you're going up that first hill real slow and it's like there's that ticking sound, you know what I mean? That's kind of what we've been doing this whole time in the game as we've been going up. And now this is the game where we reach the tipping point where he gets to the top of the mountain, not the mountain, you know what I mean, the hill of the roller coaster. At any rate, so he finally agrees to do it. Like, okay, I'll conquer the world with the Infinity Gems. But his one condition is he wants it to be a secret because he doesn't want the heroes to find out, right? Because a bunch of them are his friends and allies and stuff, and he doesn't want to fight them. And I thought this was really interesting because he's not like the one thing that he's talking about, the one thing that he seems to care about in this moment is not really it's not a moral um complaint or whatever that he has, it's selfish, right? He's his one thing is selfishness because he wants to hang out with his friends. And also I think you could argue he doesn't really want to deal with the consequences of his actions. So he's going to try to hide it from him. Right? He's going to be dishonest. So, he uses the Hellfire Club's connection to a top secret government facility called Cadmus. And they clone Ultra Girl, which they refer to as Project Galatea. These are like his version of the army of bizarre Ultramen that were used in the Negaverse. So he and the Galatea clones, who, by the way, all get stronger when they're exposed to kryptonite, friendly reminder, they all go to the USSR along with Anataz, who is the Negaverse version of Zatanna, Black Siren, who is the negative Black Canary, Dr. Chaos, aka Inza Nelson, is the negative version of Dr. Fate. Mary Super, aka Mary Bromfield, who's the negative Mary Marvel. By the way, quick timeout, brief aside. This is kind of a soapbox thing for me. I see a lot of people online who think that Superwoman, the counterpart to Wonder Woman in that movie I mentioned, the Crisis on Two Earths, a lot of people think she is that world's version of Mary Marvel. Even people who are making wikis and stuff about the movie keep saying she's actually Mary Marvel. If you watch the movie, though, there's this scene where they have a computer and they show you how the main members of the crime syndicate, under them they have people who work for them, right? And so Superwoman is at the top of that list of characters, and a lot of the characters who work for her are actually evil counterparts to the Shazam family of characters, right? And at any rate, you see their Mary Marvel in that scene. And if I remember correctly, I don't have it in front of me right now, but if I remember correctly, she looks just like Mary Marvel, but she dyes her hair blonde. Right? So for everybody who thinks that Superwoman is actually Mary, she's not. She's not. I'll leave it at that. But at any rate, so the blonde evil version of Mary Marvel is here. Olympian, aka Donna Troy, is the negative version of Wonder Girl. She's here. Owl Girl, aka Barbara Gordon, is the negative version of Batgirl. Valkyrie, aka Shaira of Thanagar, she's their version of Hot Girl. And then finally, the original Ultra Girl, Kara Zor-El, she's the negative version of Supergirl. So they all go to the USSR. And Mother Russia shows up, the character, I mean. She shows up. And thus far in our game world, she's been the biggest reason why nobody could stop Russia, right? Because she derives her strength from the Soviet citizens. For anyone who didn't see those adventures, the idea we did was if you take the average amount of weight a person can lift, multiply it by the number of people living in the USSR, that becomes the max lift of this character. So she's just a beast in terms of her stats, right? And like nobody could deal with her. So the Red King uses the Infinity Gauntlet to teleport all of the citizens of the Soviet Union 1 minute into the future. So when they all vanish, there is nobody for Mother Russia to have the strength of. So her attributes all crash and go down to like typical level, making her relatively powerless. Then the evil Barbara Gordon executes her. ending what has been a massive threat in our campaign for a while now. And once their minute is up, by the way, the Soviet citizens reappear again. And there are spies in Russia at the time, right? So since the spies are not a Soviet citizen, they didn't vanish. So let's use James Bond as our example. Let's say he was in Russia on that day. He sees an entire street worth of people or a train full of people or whatever, right? Just go away. And he doesn't know why it happened. You know what I mean? He knows it happened, but he doesn't know who did it. So when he tells, for instance, the London office, they don't really know what just happened there. And we actually got into the idea that, let's say you had a plane full of people and you make them vanish, the plane crashes because now it has no pilot, right? And when the people come back a minute later, they're in the air. Something we do is, like, when it comes to the infinity gems, the way we do it is we treat it like you're making a wish, right? And for people who are very familiar with playing role-playing games, wishes are notoriously dangerous because the GM is always going to pay very, very close attention to exactly how you word it. So unless you specifically say something like, I want them to reappear in the seats of the plane, or, whatever, that kind of thing. Um, yeah. So this would actually be this huge event in Russia. Um, and the irony is he was just kind of in that moment, he was just trying to kill Mother Russia, but he would have killed a lot of people because of that. Um, Also, there's this idea if someone's going down the highway at, say, 60 miles an hour, and you're just not in your car anymore, the car crashes, right? But when the person reappears, they have the inertia of being in the sitting position right off of pavement, moving forwards at 60 miles an hour. That's not great. You know what I mean? So yeah, this would be like a huge deal. And nobody's quite sure why it happened. That's the gist. When they when the spies and stuff report back, the governments of the world are not quite sure what that means, right? But what they do know is this happens right around the same time as characters from the negative universe were showing up, because, guys like Ultraman, he was very cocky and everything. He didn't care at all about stealth. People would have been taking pictures of him, stuff like that. And by the way, since he died inside of the Hellfire Club, the general public doesn't even know he's dead. So when the Justice League, they lost the fight to the Crime Syndicate, and that's in their original first appearance. That's in the comic itself, right? And so the Crime Syndicate took them to their world, and they made the Justice League members put their hand on a table, and the bad guys, like, cast a spell that basically says you're not allowed to take your hand off that table. And that was their way of keeping them there. And then the good guys, like Alexander Luthor, the negative counterpart of Lex Luthor, who Alex Luthor is a hero. When he rescues the Justice League and brings them back and stuff like that, the government has a lot of questions for them, right? And during that process, one of the facts that's going to come out, because again, nobody knows Ultraman is dead. One of the facts that's going to come out is that Ultraman becomes more and more powerful every time he comes into contact with kryptonite. And the last thing he did was basically have all of the villains in his world gather pretty much all the kryptonite in his world and expose him to it, right? So everybody's paranoid about him. They don't know he's dead, but they think he's like basically as powerful as the Infinity Gauntlet is. And something else we've been doing in the game is the level of paranoia, excuse me, has been going up, right? So like we did the Cuban Missile Crisis and that freaked people out about mutants like Magneto. We did some Watchmen stuff where the government has seen what Dr. Manhattan is capable of, for instance, right? And like the Watchmen story deals a lot with humanity being freaked out by all this stuff that's going on in a comic book universe. And now we're doing the Crime Syndicate, which again is giving humanity plenty of reasons to freak out. So that's going somewhere. At any rate, so then we get to the epilogue. And the harem of the Red King is growing as more and more female villains from the Negaverse are brought to Earth K. And not just from the negative universe, all sorts of villains, right, are kind of getting wrangled into this situation. And by the way, I wanted to mention this too, because even though our universe has, like I mentioned Magneto a minute ago, our universe has Marvel and DC characters both, but like all we've seen in this other universe has been DC characters, right? So we actually here in the epilogue kind of address that a little bit. Some of you guys who are familiar with Marvel Comics might be familiar with this version of the Hulk called Maestro. And Maestro is kind of like an alternate Hulk who conquered his dimension, and he had this like trophy room full of basically all the gear and stuff of all of the other Marvel characters, right? And so I can't remember if that was late 80s, early 90s. I can't quite remember when the Maestro comic was off the top of my head. But I always thought that was really cool. And then years later, they did the same thing, but with She-Hulk. And so that is sort of the version that we assign to this dimension. And her name is actually Mistro, like Misstro. So she's an evil She-Hulk. And the reason we don't see many Marvel characters in like the Crime Syndicate world, right, is because Mistro killed them. And so now she's one of these new recruits, right? And so she has like one of her shoulder pads is Iron Man's helmet. She wields her world's version of Mjolnir, which is Thor's hammer. She has the shield that was used by their version of Steve Rogers. So that's going on. And then another thing I wanted to mention here at the end is Owlgirl. So this is the evil Barbara Gordon, right? It's the counterpart of Batgirl. She uses her detective skills to figure out which Russians are secretly Martian body snatchers, because that's another big plot thing we've had going on kind of in the background of our game world. Is we did the War of the Worlds thing with Orson Welles at Grover's Mill, New Jersey, back in, I want to say 1938. And so in our version, this was DC style Martians. And after that event, a bunch of them were still on Earth. And so then in World War II, we mentioned multiple times that a soldier would lose his life in the line of duty, and one of these Martians would assume his identity, right? Shapeshift to look like the guy, and then, wear his dog tags and stuff and go back to his unit. Something else Martians can do, by the way, is read the mind. of the person so that when you question them, there's always that thing in movies like, tell me something only so and so would know, right? The Martian can actually tell you those answers, right? Which made him even more dangerous. But at any rate, so Owl Girl is working on figuring out who these guys are, and then she takes a flamethrower to them because that's their whole deal is a Martian's weakness or whatever, their kryptonite is fire. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and it's yet another thing of it's making the paranoia worse because people keep finding these burnt bodies and doing autopsies on them and stuff like that. And we borrowed really heavily from John Carpenter's The Thing. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out this is not the body of a human being. And if there were eyewitnesses, if it's some chick saying, "Oh, that was my husband," and whatever, he was in his recliner and this crazy redhead came in and torched the guy, right? Um, that would tell like the governments and stuff like, "Oh, this has been going on for a while." Then, this kind of secret invasion kind of thing has been going on for a while. Um, yeah. So I guess I'll wrap it up there because this has gone on like longer than I meant for it to. Um, Suffice it to say, we felt like this one was very interesting. Um, I particularly thought it was interesting to see the Red King kind of like I used the roller coaster metaphor earlier, where we finally gotten to the top of the hill. That he's finally starting to do stuff. It's been a little kind of willy won't he kind of thing, and now it's like, yes, he's gonna be a villain. He's gonna be a major, kind of problem. I'm curious to see how that plays out. And of course, I'm curious to see what the heroes do. Because something I'll do sometimes is I'll run games for a while. And 99% of the games I run are heroes doing good things. Um, but I really like to run villain games sometimes in just spurts. Um, because when you have actual players coming up with ideas for what the villains do, I just feel like that's always better than something I myself can think up, you know? And they'll come up with really, really interesting stuff. And I think because like when I'm running it, on some level, I'm always kind of hitting the brakes of like, well, I don't actually, take over the world or whatever. I want the heroes to win. When you have players playing the villains, I don't think they think that way at all. I think they genuinely are like, here's how we take over the world, or here's how we destroy the world, or whatever their motivation is, right? And they're just going all out. And that makes it has a greater element of danger, and then in my opinion, it's more interesting. But at any rate, we hope that you found this to be interesting too. If so, as always, we would love it if you were willing to take just a second of your time to hit the like button, check to make sure you're still subscribed, ring the bell so you know when we upload more stuff, and leave us a comment. Partially because it helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also because we love to hear from you guys. Um, from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope that all you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.